Okay, so while the car is still on the ground, we're going to break the lug nuts loose. We're not going to take them off entirely, just maybe a half to one full rotation just to break them loose so that when the car's in the air and the wheel spins, it won't be that hard to get the lug nuts off. So we'll just take our 21 millimeter breaker bar here, and we'll just go into each of these lug nuts and break them loose. Next, we're going to lift the car into the air using a floor jack, and we will place it on a jack stand. So that's important to remember when lifting. So we're lifting here on the frame of the car that comes through here, and we're leaving enough space next to it for the jack stand to go. So if you lift over here with a jack, it's going to be hard to put a jack stand under there because the jack will be in the way, so just keep that in mind. So now the car is resting on the jack stand, and make sure that it safely cradles that part of the frame so that everything's safe. Now that the car is in the air, I like to take my electric impact or my air-powered one and just very quickly remove all the lug nuts. So this can help speed the process up quite a bit. With all the lug nuts removed, you can now remove the wheel. Alright, so we're under the car here on the passenger side, looking backward, and we took our floor jack and we put it underneath the knuckle here just to kind of hold this up in place, because the strut right there can travel down farther once this is all taken apart. And so anyway, that's why we have the jack there, just to support it, and we can lift the jack up and down depending on what we need. But first we're going to go after this strut bolt right here, and it's 17 millimeter, and there's one on each side. So you're going to want to put a socket on this side and then another wrench or another socket on the other side to hold it still, because as you start to turn it on one side, the other side will just turn unless you're holding it. So we'll go ahead and do that. It's a very good idea to hit this with the penetrating oil, liquid wrench or something like that. These can get pretty stiff. So I'd even hit it with this and let it sit for a while. And if you know you're going to be doing work on the other side of the car later that day, go ahead and spray those first so that they're ready. So here we have our wrench on one side and our impact on the other. You could also just use a breaker bar if you want, but we're going to go ahead and loosen this, turning it counterclockwise. Another technique that works well, because these can be pretty stiff, is adding what they call a cheater bar, or just taking your breaker bar and adding, for example, the jack handle off of your floor jack onto the end of it to give you more leverage. So just be very careful when you're putting a lot of pressure on these. Make sure that the head of the bolt is square and it's on all the way, and that this is at a direct 90-degree angle, because with a lot of pressure you can strip bolts or you can break things. Alright, so now we can take that nut all the way off, and we're just going to push this stud through, or this bolt, and this is where you can raise or lower the suspension with the jack. This one comes about right out, so we were pretty close to where it needed to be. So with the strut off of the control arm down here, we'll just come over here, and there's a few of these that we just have to take off, and you just slide them right off of their little hook. Pretty simple, just pop them off. You have a 12 millimeter nut over on this side that we'll have to take off. And there's a stud that's actually mounted to the strut that's coming out. Sorry if you couldn't see that, but there's a stud coming out here, so we'll just take this nut off and slide this piece off. If you want to hit this guy with some penetrating lube, that's a good idea. Just because it's such a weak little bracket that it'll twist, so you might as well have it softened up a little bit. Alright, go ahead and take this off. Set that aside. And we're just pulling this block off right here for the brake lines. So everything's loose in here, but you won't be able to get the strut over the control arm. So what you'll need to do is take this 7/8 inch nut off. Now it normally has a cotter pin going through there. I've removed it to replace this control arm. So you have to bend the cotter pin straight and pull it out, and then you can take this 7/8 inch nut off, and that way we'll be able to drop the strut down off of the control arm. Alright. So now with that off, you can slide this away. Okay, just to give us a little more flexibility, we'll take this 17mm bolt that goes to our sway bar off. Remember, there's a nut on the inside of that too, so don't lose that. Just pound that out. And then just go ahead and when you have that off, just move it out of the way. Now this control arm can drop down a lot more, and we can lift the entire assembly out of here. So just make sure as you're lifting it out, you don't catch any of these lines. Okay, so everything's disconnected down here. All we have to do now, and you can see, and needs to be replaced. We'll just come up here and we'll take off these 3 top bolts there. Don't touch the middle one. It could really mess the spring up. In fact, there's a caution on the new one that says it's under pressure, so that could probably cause a problem with the spring. Now with these springs, I'd recommend buying them like this pre-assembled, so you don't have to buy or rent a spring compressor and transfer the spring over. It's not that much money more to do it this way, and it's just a lot easier. Okay, so just remove these 3 with a 12mm socket, and then the whole thing just drops out. In fact, the only thing holding it in right now is that last one that I haven't taken out all the way. Okay, all those nuts are off at the top, so we'll just lower the wheel back down and catch the spring coilover system as it's coming out. Okay, now we'll just lift the new strut right back up in there, just the way we took the other one out. Now these are side specific mainly because of the way that the brackets sit, and so just make sure you put the right one on the right side, and go ahead and take these off so that we can install them up at the top. So remove all 3 of those. And so remember not to remove that middle one. Don't touch it. Just these 3 outers. Okay, so this may be the tricky part here for you, where you have to feed those 3 studs through the holes and support it. And so then you just got to reach up with your arm and feel over on the other side and start to thread those down. So then while supporting it from the bottom, go ahead and take your, in this case they changed it from a 12 to a 13mm setup, so take your 13mm socket and tighten all those down as evenly as you can. When you come back down here, it's basically just reassembly. We'll start by, first of all, just make sure that this control arm goes over the, that this goes over the control arm, so you don't have a problem there. But you can go ahead and start reattaching. In fact, we'll first start with this one here. Alright, so we just lifted the control arm and met it up with the where the strut comes down, put our 17mm bolt through it. A little bit of Loctite on here. Now we're putting the other 17mm nut on the other side. So we'll go ahead and tighten these down real good and torque them up good. Alright, so we got our wrench down here that we're holding on that side, and then just tightening on this side. Alright, now just torquing it down with a bigger wrench on this side, and once again holding that other wrench on the other side. So now we'll move on to this part right here. Just put this knuckle back up in here and put our 7/8 inch nut back on. So we're going to go ahead and lift on this control arm here in order to get it up in there, and then put our nut on. With it all lined up, go ahead and reinstall your nut. And once again, that's 7/8 inch. All right, slide your cotter pin back through the top of this if you have one. I need to get one. And then lower this jack just a little bit so that you can line up the sway bar link once again. And then just put on the washer with the nut behind it with a little Loctite. Now install the washer, followed by the nut with some Loctite on it. Get that good and tight, and then we'll just hit it with the impact here, and then maybe a breaker bar for good measure. Okay, just tighten it a little bit more with this breaker bar. Next, just reattach the brake hose block here. Go ahead and tighten down this 12mm nut to hold that brake line block in place. Okay. Then come over and just reattach these little guys. You'll see there's a little groove here on the side, and it's meant to slide right onto that little ledge. So just put it there and push it all on. Okay, so those slide in just like that. It's a real tight fit, but they do slide right on. So there's one there, and then we had our other one right here that we'll just push into place. Alright, double check everything that it's tight and how it should be. And then all you have to do is put the wheel back on. Once it's on the ground, you might want to come up here again and just double check these, make sure that they're tight. Next, just lift your wheel back on and hand thread the lug nuts, and then you can drive the rest of them on and torque them down. Okay, so all these are hand threaded on here, and so I'm just going to go and speed up the process here with my little electric impact. So then just pull the jack out and start to lower the car down until it barely touches the ground. And with just enough weight on it where you won't spin the tire, go ahead and torque the lug nuts down to about 95 foot-pounds. Okay, so then just torque all these to about 95 foot-pounds and do the star pattern. So you go from this lug nut to that one, then up, and just go across from each other.